Introduction to percents. Percents are a very important part of not just math, they are part of your life. And depending on how much experience you've had shopping or with sports or buying your own things, percents are definitely out there. Banking, all kinds of stuff we're going to do. So let's get started. The first thing we need to do is define a percent. Percent is defined as per, meaning out of, and cent, meaning 100. So percent means out of 100, 100. Determine the part of each figure that is shaded. So you can take a look at these on your packets, and you could pause here if you need to and figure out what percent of each is shaded. In the first diagram, there are actually 100 blocks, so all you need to do is figure out how many of those blocks are shaded, and in this case it would be 36%, 36 out of 100. In the case of number 2, there are 10 blocks, and 7 of them are shaded, so that represents 70%. In the case of number 3, again, that is 10 blocks, and so this is 50%, and then this one I don't think came out very well on your paper, but for each section, if you look at mine, it's going to be 50% and 25% for each of those small quarters. And I think most of this is common sense to you. Let's take a look at how we can answer some questions related to percents. Use the graph of test scores to answer each question. The number of students is on the vertical axis, and the grades are on the horizontal axis. Use the graph of test scores to answer each question. How many students are represented? So in this case, reading the graph, you would have to add all of those up. I see that there are 100 students represented. What percent of the students then received a C or better? So a C or better means they got a C, a B, or an A. And if you add that up, it would be, ding, 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 ding. Do the work on your own, please. 80%. What percent of the students did not receive an F? So a nice way to do this is to take the number that did receive an F and you do 100 minus the students that did get an F. And so only 5 students got an F, thankfully, and that's 95% did not get an F. If there are 100 students in the freshman class at Podunk University, 12% are math majors. So how many students are math majors? Now you can do this a number of different ways, and at this point I'm not going to restrict you to one way over another. So why don't you try to answer those questions on your own using common sense? In the case of letter A, if 12% of the students are math majors, if it were out of 100, that would be 12, but it's only out of 50, so only 6 students are math majors. If 36% of the students live off campus, how many students live off campus? Well, likewise, that would be 18 students. And if there are a total of 250 students, what percent are freshmen? So think about it as there's 50 freshmen out of 250 total students. So what percent does that represent? That is 1/5, which is also 20%. And we're going to talk about common percents in a minute. On a quiz with 25 questions, figure out the grade as a percentage. Nice thing for me is after I do the percents unit, I no longer write your grade as a percent at the top of your paper. You should be able to figure it out on your own. So this is actually pretty easy. So if they missed 3 questions, then they got 22 right out of 25. So a 22 out of 25 should be an 88%. And you can do that using like ratios or anything you would want. If they got 20 questions correct, that's 20 out of 25 or 80%. Let's take a look at the common percents now. I want to talk about common percents first because these are the ones that you should know and you must know by heart. And this is the quiz that you're going to have on Tuesday. On Tuesday, I'm going to give you either a decimal, a fraction, or a percent, and you're going to have to convert it to whatever I tell you to convert it to. The tens are easy to figure out because they can easily be related to 100. Quarters we should all know because we have quarters in our dollars, and so that makes sense to us for money. Fifths, you can always convert it to a tenth, right? So that's easy to tell. And thirds, I expect you to know thirds. And if something is 33 1/3%, I do not want you writing 33.3%. I want you writing 33 1/3%, because if you could have a 33.3% of $1 million or 33 1/3% of $1 million, which would you choose? If your answer is different, then you have to know that those percents are also different. Eighths are the ones left over, and eighths are the ones that students sometimes struggle with. Now, you shouldn't have a problem with this eighth, this eighth, this eighth, or this eighth. You can convert them to fourths, and then they're just basically quarters. Eighths are used very, very frequently in banking. And the way that I think of this, well, there's two ways to think of it, but if you can just remember that 1/8 is 0.125, then it's a piece of cake, because all you have to do is know your 2/8, and then you can add that to get 3/8. If you knew 4/8, which is 1/2, you would add 0.125 to get 5/8, etc. So these are the percents that you might have to study a little bit. I'm not even going to fill in the easy ones. So this is 0.375 because it's 0.25 plus 1/8. If I take 0.5 and I add 0.125, I get 0.625. If I take 0.75 and add 0.125, I get 0.875. Okay, so these are all the percentages there, and this is just going to be 1. So I expect you to please fill out this page and memorize it. Most of it, hopefully, you already know. Okay, so this should be completely filled out by Monday. So a very quick refresher here on converting decimals to percents, fractions to percents, etc. And what I need you to do here is, if you know how to do this, you can skip it. But decimals to percents, I have to go percents to decimals. I have to go fraction to percent and percent to fraction. So I'm going to review this for those of you who may not remember from before. Let's say I have a decimal of 0.5. How do I make that into a percent? The rule is move the decimal. I move it 2 places to the right. Okay? So that's going to be 50%. I put in a placeholder, a 0 placeholder. So if I had 0.73, I move my decimal 2 places to the right, and that becomes 73%. Now, if I'm going from a percent to a decimal, I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the left. And it's going to just work the opposite of the way we just did it. So let's say I had 32%. I move the decimal. Where is the decimal? It's right here. When I don't have a decimal, it's at the end. I go left 2 places, and I get 0.32. So if I had 35.8%, that's going to look a little different in that it's going to have 3 places. It doesn't matter. I just follow my rule, 0.358. If we're talking about fractions to percents and percents to fractions, take an example of 1/5. So I divide 1 by 5, and I have to add zeros there, and so I get 0.2, and then I follow my rule above for decimals. Okay? So in general, you're just going to divide numerator by denominator, and then use your rules for decimals. So that's going to give me 20%. If I'm changing a percent to a fraction, I put it over 100% because that's what it is. So let's say I had 32% and I want to make that into a fraction. I have to make it 32 over 100. Then I have to reduce it. 32 over 100 is 8 over 25. So that's basically the Reader's Digest version. If you need any help with this specifically, please see me for extra help, because that is assumed that you all know how to do this. Now let's look at the oddballs. These are the percentages that students sometimes get confused by because we're dealing with decimals. Let's look at this particular scenario. If percents are less than 1%, it's a very, very small amount. 1/2% is read 1/2%. It is equal to 0.5%. It's not 5%. It's 0.5%. Therefore, to convert the decimal to the decimal form, move the decimal 2 places to the left. So if I want to know what a 0.5% is as a decimal, I convert it to 0.5% and I move the decimal place 2 places to the left, just like any other number. Also, 0.0007 as a percent would still follow the rule of moving the decimal 2 places to the right. That's going to be 0.07%. It looks strange, but when we are dealing with percents, that's a possibility. So converting a decimal to a percent and a percent to a decimal and a fraction to a percent is something that we all need to be familiar with. So why don't you try those next 6 questions? You can come back and check your answers. 0.75% is the same as 0.75%. So I follow the rule of moving my decimal 2 places to the left, and that's 0.005%. 0.6% is 0.006, 0.45, 0.00625, and if I have to write the following as percents, that would be 7.5% and 0.5%. In other words, you're not always making it look nice. Sometimes it's not going to look so nice. It's going to be kind of a messy answer. Now we have to also consider percents that can be greater than 100%. And some of you know that from getting a bonus question on a test. If you got every question right and you got the bonus question, well, you got more than 100%. 100% is equal to 1 over 1 as a fraction and 1.0 as a decimal. Therefore, any number greater than 1 expressed as a percent is more than 100%. 150% is read 150%. To convert it to a decimal form, we're moving it 2 places to the left as usual. This should be over 1. It is 1.5. So for 2.75 as a percent, we're going to follow the rule of moving the decimal 2 places to the right. 275%. And these are used in real life. Jewelry is marked up 400%. Why? Because it's usually about 4 times the amount that it costs the jeweler to sell it. So the markup is 400%. Think about that. Time to go into the jewelry business. Convert the following into decimals. So why don't you go ahead and try those 4 using the rule of moving the decimal place. So 175% is 1.75, 2.1, 350%, and 180%. So that is all for this evening. We'll practice converting percents back and forth from decimals to fractions on Monday and study your common percents. Have a great night, everyone.